Thank you, everybody, so much. So we found out at maybe 6:57 that we did not have a host, and the host had all the questions. We did not know beforehand what he planned to ask us. So one good thing is that my work on public space really values spontaneity and improvisation. So we're going to do that right now. So we had a few minutes to discuss. We, right now, each of us will spend the 5 minutes discussing kind of our position on the importance of public space, civic life, and engagement. And then we'll take it from there. And then we're going to try and kind of debate, fight maybe, and then we'll let you debate and fight with us.
Yeah.
So sound good? And if anyone knows, if anyone has the mysterious question list, please. So, Tommy, tell us what you do.
Yeah.
Or we might interview each other. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, your research is on spontaneity, mine is on friction. So I think it's going to be interesting. Really nice that you are all here. My name is Tommi Laitio. So I spent a decade in city government, first looking at youth services, so that combines us, being charged for those in Helsinki, in Finland, happiest country in the world. And I was mostly responsible for places and services that people use on a voluntary basis. So rather than doctors or schools, those are like libraries, parks, arts and culture, youth centers are places where people go because they want to. I often say that like symphony orchestra is like your spouse can force you there, but that's about it, or your parents. So my interest has always been around like what would make people open their front door and join public life. And so after working in Helsinki for quite some time, I got this call from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore for a 2-year fellowship to do research on the future of public services. And I decided to focus on this question of future public spaces. And I stumbled, so I did case studies in 3 cities in the United States, 1 in Brazil, and 1 in the Netherlands. And I stumbled into this notion of convivencia, which is my favorite word at the moment, and I'm going to teach you all to say that by the end of this event. It's like a word in Spanish, a word in Portuguese, that in English you have a word conviviality, and I think we're going to debate that. Yeah. It doesn't mean the same. Is that because English has like dried out all of the fun from the term? No, because the English word conviviality is kind of like, let's all be jolly and get happy together. Like, let's be polite and have good manners. Whereas convivencia is more like, one of my interviewees said that it's a bit like gathering for Christmas with your larger family. Like, you've all traveled there from afar. You care about those people because you showed up. But you're really nervous that you're sitting next to that uncle again. And like, there's an element of joy and playfulness in it, in terms of convening with other people, but there's also elements of friction. There's like elements of joy and elements of friction. I think that characterizes a successful public life, public space. Yeah. That there's like a need for all of us to meet other people, not maybe halfway, but at least towards them. And I think when we manage to get to that space that's between, like I would say that convivencia is between harmony and open conflict. It's that space where I have to recognize that you're here and what you are here for, but I also, like, I was on Sunday at the Bentway. We met there, and he showed up. Amazing. And we were, like, doing this tour of the Bentway, and someone was skateboarding there. So we had to, like, accommodate to each other in that space so that she could continue skateboarding and we could do our public art tour. Yeah, that's what I do. So I work with public libraries, public parks on how we create conditions for convivencia. So what does that mean in terms of working at the library, visiting the library, visiting a park, what are the skills that you could learn at the library, what are the skills you need for convivencia, and I think that's where our work comes together. I think the link between our work is that anyway, young people are the people that everyone wants to the public space until they show up. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start off by just sharing a little bit about who I am and where I come from. So I was born in Canada, in North York, General, but I grew up in Hong Kong. So as you could imagine, it's a very different city with a lot of people, very dense, skyscrapers everywhere. And that inspired me to first consider pursuing architecture as a career. And when I got to first year architecture school, that quickly didn't quite pan out as well as I thought it would. And I realized that my passion actually lies in bigger picture thinking and less about doors and staircases and details, but more on how cities work and how people interact with these spaces at a larger scale. And as I transitioned and pivoted into urban planning, and that was what I studied eventually, I first was very interested in public spaces. I was really into the concept of placemaking and how people would interact and use these public spaces, how to design these spaces for people to mingle, people to coexist. But as I continued my studies, I realized that there is a gap between what I studied when I was in high school or even younger. My idea of city building didn't quite. There was a huge gap between what I learned or lack thereof and what I was studying in school. And I realized that as I was taking a group of kids for a camp on a field trip downtown, they were asking me on the subway, Ryan, what is urban planning? What are you studying? What is that? And I told them, and they still didn't quite understand what I was studying and what kind of job I wanted to pursue. And that sparked the idea of pursuing or looking into youth engagement as an area that I eventually dedicated really my career so far to, which is engaging and involving young people in the exercise of community building, of city building, and getting them involved in the decision making of the spaces, the places, and the programs, and what have you that make up our cities. And so I want to make that connection to what you were sharing a little bit earlier. When I work with the youth in our program at Urban Minds, when we talk about public spaces, they see public spaces not only as a place to hang out or I don't know what the lingo is anymore, but to chill maybe. Yet it is also a place for them to learn how to be citizens, how to coexist with other people, learn what it means to what pro-social behaviors or not anti-social behaviors are like, and what those frictions might be. And so I'd love to share more and maybe have a little bit of a discussion in a moment about that. And yeah, it's a place where public spaces are where youth get to learn who they are and how they could or should be in the public realm. And I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. My watch just notified me that my heart rate is unusually high. Which I was like, thanks, technology.
You're okay.
Yeah, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
So, building on this conversation, now I'm a researcher and theorist of public space, and it comes out of the idea that public spaces are invaluable places where we are able to come together, and it centers also on the importance of like physical co-presence. Like we're all in this room together, And that might not seem very amazing, but as a sociologist, I find the ability to come together in kind of easy and seamless ways is demonstration of the efforts of social coordination when they work. So I started a project with my co-director Mervyn Horgan at the University of Guelph, and we study sociable public spaces. So the ways that people enjoy in kind of at least positive social interactions in a whole range of public spaces. So not just like leisure sites that you might think of like public parks or playgrounds, but also those in-between spaces. Sometimes spaces that they don't quite fit the full designation of public space. So it can be just a chat on a sidewalk. It can be a park bench. It can be little interactions. But if you understand the variety of positive ways that we interact with one another, they might not be memorable, but they're fairly positive. You get a better understanding of what is working. So a lot of sociologists, I'm not gonna lie, they study really negative things. So they would tell you they would study only the conflicts. So our response is to say, yes, that's important, but we have to actually understand all these ways that we're really like successfully in mutually engaging things in common ways, have common interests and sharing ideas, and at their best, that it's a way to create different versions of equity and belonging at their very best. But they don't always work. And so we have a version, so we center sociability, don't use conviviality intentionally as a term. I think we can talk about this. But your term is different, but there's a, and we center sociability also because it's kind of very low stakes, if that makes sense. There's not a lot of, you can have a very fleeting and positive sociable encounter, and you don't have to know the person, you don't have to see them again, and it's a way, in a really simple way, that we have pleasurable encounters with people we don't know. And public spaces are one of the only places that we really spend time with a range of people that we may or may not have anything in common with. And that's really interesting, because there's many ways you can conduct your life and spend no time with people who you don't have anything in common with. So we need many spaces. So that's what our research, I'll talk a little bit as appropriate about some of our kind of key findings around what to do. But the big picture is we need to create many spaces of contact across different lifestyles and different types of public spaces. So that includes libraries, it includes parks, but also redefined parks. It includes really different leisure spaces, just a whole range, and it includes basic necessities. So I'll leave it at that. So maybe let's start with, what do you think the difference between your preferred term and my preferred term of sociability would be?
And then we can have the audience
And then you can tell us who wins.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So in the research interviews, like when you ask people about convivencia, they talk about that there's two levels. There's the level of civility, which is like getting along with strangers, which I think is quite close to what you're talking about, sociability. And like one of my arguments lately has been that when we think about the library space, like this space here, getting along is a really ambitious goal already. Like getting along is actually a really great achievement. And it requires exactly what you're saying, those small acts of recognition, small acts of kindness. And then on top of that level of non-hostility, civility, some levels of indifference, we can actually then build those meaningful groups and kind of affinity groups, if you may. Like we can meet with new mothers or people who want to learn Spanish or so on, but we sometimes in public space discussion there's this like naive idea that we are successful if everyone's getting along and everyone knows everyone's name and everyone's holding their hands, and that's not the point of a public space. But getting to, I like your word sociability. I started using this Spanish and Portuguese word because it has that element of friction, and in cities like Buenos Aires and Medellin and others, they use it as a policy goal to create conditions for convivencia, which starts from a recognition of stark inequalities, and you know, understanding that you need to nurture and design and create those spaces where we can get at least to the level of being non-hostile. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
But I was curious, because you were saying about public spaces are spaces where young people can learn those skills. What's your idea of what those skills are?
Yeah, well, first I would say through the work that I do with my team at Urban Minds, we host workshops and events, and we do projects with our clients who are municipalities and civic organizations. And often the questions that our clients or our partners want to ask youth is what do you want to do in this space? Like, what do you want to have? What do you want to see in these spaces that we're going to plan and design? And often than not, they're like, oh, we want to hang out and we want to spend time with our friends, but yeah, what does that actually look like? And in terms of, you know, you're not the only ones who are going to be there either. So what does that look like when everybody they're there to hang out, but not with each other? And I think the first word that comes to mind when you're asking about skills is really tolerance. I don't know if that's the right word, but just being okay with what other people are doing. And I find that when I talk to our participants about places like libraries, it's often a mixed bag of reactions and sentiments. I think they're not quite, some of them are, some of them aren't, but they're not quite at the level of understanding the larger social issues such as homelessness or mental health issues that other people are experiencing. And so whenever we ask them to describe their local library branch, for example, some of them do share negative feelings about their libraries because that's often the only shelter, a warm place for people to be in. And same thing with public transit. It's difficult, but tolerance is one, and then the next word I would think of is probably empathy, understanding what other people are going through, and then starting to understand how then are we supposed to share this space together. So those are the first things that come to mind, and if offered, the opportunity to, we would have those deeper discussions about, who uses these spaces and what kinds of qualities or features or amenities these spaces should offer so that all kinds of people feel comfortable and welcomed and included in these spaces. But it's a learning process, as I said earlier.
That makes me think of, we just published this case study earlier this year on a new park that was opened in Memphis in Tennessee in the United States. It's called Tommi Park. It's on the Mississippi. It's named after a black man who in the 1920s saved 32 white people from drowning at a time when most of these white people wouldn't have shaken his hand, or actually didn't shake his hand even after they were saved. It was named after this man in the 50s and then left underdeveloped. And they just did like a massive $60 million renovation on it, and it's one of the most amazing public parks that I've seen, because there's been intention in recognizing, because you're saying about who feels welcome, and so there's been like intentional design choices to make sure that in a segregated city like Memphis, that you make sure that especially black residents feel welcome and seen. So the public art represents the long and ongoing struggle towards justice. They made an intentional decision not to have uniformed security people in the space, but train park rangers in like trauma-informed de-escalation techniques. They've named basketball courts, they're under a canopy. They're named after Tyree Nichols, who was a young man who was killed by Memphis police a couple of years ago. So, and it's one of the most inclusive spaces in the city. And really, the staff has this idea and expectation that, especially, for instance, for large groups of young people, that you engage with them. and you try to create those relationships so that they feel welcome to that space, but also you negotiate constantly with them about, in a way, the limits of also their behavior in that space. Yeah.
Great. One of the things that's, when you're talking about that example, so one of the things we really recommend coming out of our research is that you have to, how to allow for like all types of users and uses in a way that's both planned and flexible. And there's a tension between those two terms. And it's very hard to realize in practice because too much flexibility in space, there's a concern that there won't be kind of like a coordination between users of how to agreement, but it's also a way to be much more accepting to create an opening and hospitable public space requires it. So do you have any, can you give any examples of how those negotiations took place in that project or others, some of those tensions?
I think they made very intentional decisions on hiring. So hiring from those communities that already are bringing different people together. Like they hired from like climbing gyms, for instance, and these kind of places, or communities that they are not traditionally reaching, so that you have people who understand the users, and then they were hiring people who are actually using the public space. They're like, do you need a job, sort of thing. So I think that's been definitely one. We had, in our research project, we had a long discussion about language that they used. We started from conviviality and moved away from it. And in the end, they ended up using neighborly as the word, whereas neighborly is like a word that people kind of understand very instinctively, like what it means. Like there's a difference between being a neighbor and being a friend. Yeah. And like, if I'm a neighbor, I'm expected to help you if you fall. I'm expected to say hi to you, but we are not creating a continued dependency, especially in a city. So it's also a kind of setting those realistic expectations. And then another example that comes to mind, one of my case studies was in Fortaleza in Brazil. And there was this researcher who I interviewed. I was doing research on these small parks they were building in neighborhoods and managing with local residents. And she said, like, yeah, you people from the global north have this idea that you can design a perfect system. That there is this idea of perfect system that you can just like tweak and take all the friction out of it. Like, she was like, we don't believe in that idea. So like the only way is constant reconfiguration and negotiation and going towards more practical solutions. And I think sometimes, going to your point, like we seek comfort in control in public spaces. And I think because of the turmoil that we've been going through and rising aggression in public spaces, also staff often want more control. They want more rules. They want more rigid disciplines, as in like when can I throw people out from the space? But do you have examples of like what's the like a space where they find the right balance between?
Well, a lot of our like my public space research is very concerned about the rise of anti-hospitable forms, like deterrence. So, preventing like hostile architecture. Like preventing people from stopping, preventing the ability to rest, to relax, to have even like shelter from weather. And that to me is one of those, is a big question, because when in theory, we can present our research and say that these practices are damaging, they're ill-informed, and we need to rethink about what this means for our public spaces. But then there's a bunch of concerns, both from how much you can regulate like commercial and private actors, how much a city can do in terms of its regulations. And it's been challenging to instead insist on, say, more like, say, flexible architecture as a solution. So something as simple as a bench that could be used in so many different ways. And it's really had mixed kind of take up in, I think, different, in different cities and different examples. One thing I would mention, so one project I'm involved with is Plaza Pops, which is in Toronto, and they do these temporary flexible spaces, and right now it's being set up in Wexford, and it's a way to try to create a public space out of a parking lot, a private space. So instead of private spaces claiming public spaces, you have the reverse. And I see this as an interesting model, right? So instead, push back and say now, no, we are going to make public spaces out of private spaces. So this is where the division isn't always so clear cut. And because and it involves things like shade, plants, gardens, if any of you are familiar with it, benches, there's some programming, youth programming. And I think that these are things that work well because it's allowing for more spontaneity of use and less regulated use. So does it mean that at night are, various youth and adults using it as a drinking space because it's comfortable and has seating and a little bit of shelter? Yeah, but that's one of the uses.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add to that because I think both public and private actors, those who own and manage these spaces that are accessible by the public, they really have two choices. One is to make them more accessible and more inclusive, and the other less so. And I could think of examples where I've been to a city in Florida where I've been in sort of this, I think it's privately owned sort of commercial outdoor walking mall kind of space, and there were signs that clearly indicate curfew hours for underage residents or members of the public. And there are also more hostile designs and measures that are targeted towards, I guess, what people consider loitering. But really, the concept of loitering is just what people who have the power who say you're not welcomed here. But if you're, I don't know, if you're an adult, you're dressed nicely, and you're coming out of a bar, you're not loitering, at least not to the eyes of those who control and manage the space. But if you're a teenager and you're drinking at night, you're probably considered as a loiterer, right?
Yeah, it's used to regulate some identities more than others.
Yep, exactly. And the issue of race as well, gender, and all those different identities, it's really an equity issue. It comes down to who has power, who doesn't, who gets to be in a space, who doesn't. And so it's a discussion I actually recently had with someone that I worked with, where we were working with a client who manages shopping centers, and they clearly wanted to make the shopping center more youth-friendly, kind of bringing back the idea of the 80s and 90s where teenagers are mall rats, right? They're hanging out at malls and really making that their space. You don't see that as much anymore, especially now that there's online shopping and there are online communities, and after COVID as well, just that sentiment hasn't, or that, I guess, trend hasn't really been sustaining itself, but it's a choice. It's an active choice that these owners and operators need to make, whether to bring back that sort of feeling and the intention of welcoming youth and really the general public into their spaces or not.
That's actually a great example, because we have been doing stuff on the reinvention of the shopping mall as not a commercial space. Interesting, because it's actually happening already, because you have people using it in very different ways. And so one of our graduate students, Shimang, he's studied the shopping mall in Shanghai as well as Guelph. Can you imagine the difference? Anyway, but looking at all these non-commercial uses and ways that it's a space to hang out, that it's sociable, especially for youth. And I think there's this other thread that could be, we could reinvent these places. They don't have to be just for the commercial contact. I think there's something there for sure.
One of the things so I was in Helsinki until 21, so the first wave of COVID, or first waves of COVID, and like most public spaces, we had to close most of the youth clubs. So we had 350 youth workers working for the city who couldn't do their work where they normally did their work. So we started doing much more outreach to shopping malls, and actually after COVID, that work has just grown, and actually the city has been able to make a very strong case both to the shopping centers, to the police, that this is helping both the safety of downtown for these young people, but also for everyone else. Because I mean, a lot of young people gathering in front of an entrance of a shopping mall we can debate whether that's the right or wrong sentiment, but it's scary for
people.
A lot of people.
Get nervous. Yeah.
And understanding kind of what's the role of a youth worker versus a security guard versus a police, and like how can you exchange information on what's happening downtown and where young people are in problems or causing problems, in a way that the youth workers can build different relationships than security guards and police. So they want to create those relationships that young people can talk to them about maybe something that they've done that's illegal, or questions that especially girls often in public spaces face a lot of harassment, and they're being offered a lot of things in exchange of revealing photos and what have you. So I think that's like one of we need more professionals in those spaces, and different competencies in those spaces.
Yeah, very much changes the social dynamics and opportunities for sure.
Yeah, and I would say with the pandemic, I know we all don't want to talk about it anymore, but yeah, even just talking to some of our volunteers and participants, there really that 3-year gap in their social development as teenagers, as young adults, really stunted the way they understand how to be in these spaces. And so going back to the idea of just learning just how to be in these spaces is important, and it's something not just from a sociable sort of perspective, but personally, I think they really miss that opportunity to discover who they are as individuals. These public spaces are where you can get away from your parents, get away from your teachers, and just be yourselves.
Yeah. You actually explore your identity in public, actually. And there's a publicness that you have to have available. That's a really good point.
And I don't know how the public transportation works here, but at least in the Nordics, there's an advantage for those teenagers who live in metro areas, because the metro is easier to use without a ticket than a bus.
Right.
So there's
exactly.
much more
They
flexibility for
on,
them. But I think there's also like a conversation that could be had around who needs to learn from whom. I think actually young people, and especially marginalized non-white young people, have a lot to teach to other people on how to navigate situations of complexity and messiness, which is what most of our public life nowadays is. And I use messiness in a way that I think there's also wonder and like wonderful things and play in messiness. There's this paper from these British sociologists, Shamsa Sinha and Les Back. It's called Conviviality in Racism's Ruins, where they did ethnography on non-white immigrant youth in London, and identified these skills that these young people have. And I've been using that list that they identified, these 5 skills, as a way to illustrate that what are the skills that, for instance, places like libraries could teach all of us on how to deal with surprising and unpredictable situations and actually turn them into something more positive. The skills are very simple. They are attentiveness and curiosity without judgment, as in being able to read the room. Then the second one is being able to express that you care for everyone's well-being, and being able to do, in a way, the ability for empathy, as you mentioned.
Yep.
The third one is worldliness, so the ability to see that your your opportunities are bigger than what's immediately in front of you.
In your bubble.
And especially like for young people who have a mixed background, understanding that you have a local identity, but you also have layered identities that go beyond the local reality. The fourth one is, which is my favorite and most difficult, aversion to the pleasures of hating. So when you encounter something that's unpredictable or unwelcome or surprising, the ability to deal with that situation, maybe just by walking out of it, or saying something funny, or whatever, like being able to, in a way, de-escalate that situation, because it might be actually dangerous for you. And then the last one is building a home in a broken world. So recognizing that you don't live in a perfect world, but it being able to feel grounded and a sense of there-ness. And I think that, like, that's been like my mission lately, like telling libraries that libraries could build programs where we all could learn these skills. Being able to, like, I think those are skills that we need to be at ease with, in a way, diversity, complexity, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, and I know Toronto Public Library, a lot of branches now have youth hubs.
Yeah.
And those are fantastic places. I wish I grew up with, a library system with these youth hubs, because, yeah, I've been to quite a few of them now, and it's a place where the youth can just do their homework or study together, but it's also a place where they can play video games. Like, come on. But yeah, it's that both loudness of playing video games and hanging and just having fun together, and the quietness that's required when you're studying and doing homework. How do those two types of uses coexist? And I think that's what I was trying to get at in terms of tolerance, but I think much more eloquently put, aversion to the pleasure of hating, right? Just being okay with it, right? And being in a state and learning to be in that state of I can handle this. I don't need to, flip out or what have you, and just learning to be in these spaces.
And it's like a muscle that you have to train. You promised to teach us some things so that we make sure that this event gets a good score.
And I'm going to teach you through a question I have for both of you.
Okay.
And that I think might interest the audience.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. What are some of the recommendations you'd like to get in front of municipal policy planners, actors? What would you like to tell them based on your research and experiences and work?
I can start.
Yeah.
Well, first off, that's really what I've been advocating all this time, is getting youth involved in the decision-making process, whether it's the planning, the design, even the building of these spaces. You mentioned Bentway. They actually had an event this weekend where they had youth participate in building one of the installations there, which was super cool. And so having them involved increases their sense of ownership over these spaces, and knowing that I now care about these spaces because I was part of it, and then picking up on those skills that Tommy mentioned. So getting them involved is one, and second, don't shut them out. The curfew sort of bylaws that I mentioned earlier. And even just the security presence or the surveillance of youth in these spaces.
Thoughts on street art?
And just thinking about, how can we invite youth artists to be part of those projects, rather than seeing everything as graffiti and we got to scrub it off, right?
And scrubbing it off.
Right. So, and I think many of you in the audience would know this, but graffiti artists respect other artists' work. So if there's actual good work, they won't spray paint over it, right?
Yeah.
So I think not shutting them out is another. And finally, I think something to do with our education. So in Ontario, our civics education is quite lacking. It's a half-credit course in high school, and that's it. And I think all we really learn is just government structure and vote. people vote. But there's so much more to that. And in our public spaces, we learn to protest. We learn to participate in marches and demonstrations. And we saw the climate strikes and climate marches, Black Lives Matter, et cetera. Even the protests we saw outside earlier. This is all part of being in a healthy democracy and youth being part of that and seeing examples of that. So allowing and even encouraging that participation in the form of education would be great.
Yeah. Amazing. Great ideas.
Those seats that you mentioned on the Bentway, I'm using that as an example based on my 2 days in Toronto as an amazing public space. But the design, I understood, that was led by a feminist artist collective. And the seats that they build are amazing because they're like very playful, and the use is not obvious. There's not like one way to use it. You have to like be in a position that a 46-year-old man can't really do anymore. And I think it's wonderful. But that wasn't my recommendation. Mine is maybe boring. I think it would be smart to link the funding of public spaces to real estate values.
Tell us more.
So, yeah, we got to land value at this point at the end. LA Public Library is funded in a way that they get 0.03% of the city's real estate values. That's their budget, which is $250 million a year. I don't think it automatically drives speculation, but it makes the case that these investments in public spaces are beneficial to public life and also to real estate values and people's well-being. I think these institutions are underfunded in most cities. I don't know what the case is here, but it's at least on, like in your southern neighbor, the big one. It's really horrible in a lot of cities. Like I haven't seen public spaces in that condition anywhere in Europe. So I think you have to find a stronger funding, more stable funding instrument for these spaces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like the contrast between your points. Now, I'm debating, so we should turn it over for questions, but I did have one more question.
But you didn't ask your question.
I was, I'm moving between roles. Put simply, super kind of boring and practical too, is that actually we need stronger understanding and concepts for understanding social research and putting it in the policy and planning dialogue. So it's not just about built environment, it's not just about the economics or the regulation, that actually we need to understand how people use spaces, how they interact in them, have youth perspectives, so that would include that. That would have a youth research team that pretty much gets to design things and contribute and say, so it would encompass all these different ways that social research could really enhance our understanding of kind of the built environment and planning, policy and planning landscape. So. That's not very fun. So I just really want to know, what is one like space, place, something that you just think is an excellent example, model, something you love, something you're passionate about from anywhere? Here, do you want me to answer?
Sure, please.
Okay, because that'll give you time more to. I didn't have my answer, but
10 more minutes.
yeah. Very quickly.
It's a long story.
We've been studying, one of the areas, the sites, is outdoor, public, free, accessible ice rinks. And one thing, first off, not a skater, right? I am terrible. Our research team was also pretty terrible. Like one of our students in his field notes, he described how he had to crawl off the ice on his hands and knees. And then can you imagine, this is his paid job. It's like, so he had to keep coming back. But we were looking at all the different ways people use this, a free public outdoor ice rink, hockey-free outdoor ice rink in different places. And one of the things I love about the ice rink is that it's a place where you can fail incredibly in public. Like you can fall and just like be a total disaster, and you're supported and welcomed, and everyone, it's like kind of, you don't, it's so supportive. And you know, we have all this kind of hesitation around admitting failure, or it's like socially unacceptable, but an ice rink, it reverses that. It's suddenly welcome, and people help each other all the time. And one of the things we observe is the way that little kids help all these terrible adult skaters. They're like, it's okay, you'll get better. Like, it's so amazing, and they pick them up. Or how people help, like tying skates is like maybe one of the worst things on earth, trying to tighten your skates. And just having like all these people help and problem solve. It's really a wonderful example to me of kind of what a really great sociable public space can do. Do you have enough time?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly mention a shout out to, I'm a big fan of an organization based in Dallas called Better Block. And what they do is that they transform give them a parking lot, give them an intersection, what have you. They can transform that space using paints and pop-up furniture over a day, and that becomes a plaza for people to hang out and enjoy being in public. And so it applies to really anywhere. And they did a project here along the Danforth. And yeah, look them up.
Great.
I would mention the Central Library in Helsinki.
I knew it.
I had to use one Finnish example. It was opened in 2018. It's called Oodi, O-O-D-I. It sits on, like, opposite to the National Parliament, in a way that when you're on the balcony on the third floor, you stand on the same level as members of Parliament on the other side of the street. It's just incredible as a space, and I think because I think one of the important parts of public spaces is that there's also an element of wonder and awe and playfulness, something that you can't get at home. So you have like an incredible sculpture of Ai Weiwei. You have these weird stairs in the middle of the building that don't lead to anywhere, but are super popular amongst teenagers. You have this DNA staircase that goes through the building that has an artwork from a Finnish artist called Otto Karvonen. It's called Dedication. And he asked the public who the library should be dedicated to. And then he curated over 300 identities that go through the staircase. And they are not all obvious. They are all, there's like, the library is dedicated to prejudiced people. The library is dedicated to people who've committed suicide, people who've been adopted, people who believe in fairies. And it's an incredible experience when you see parents going through the staircase and explaining those words to their kids. And then on top of this, it gets like 8,000 people a day in a city of 650,000 people, which is a lot. The library is managed with this idea of shared governance. So the staff members are divided into teams, and the teams make the decisions, not the managers. Because the space is very unpredictable. What happens on a day, you never know. So they've given a lot of agency to staff to keep colleagues informed, but everyone has the right to, in a way, decide what needs to be done in this situation. And it's created this space that when people have visitors now to Helsinki, everyone takes their guests there, because they're like, this is what we are about, that we build these beautiful, accessible, high-quality public spaces on the most valuable piece of land in the country, and everyone's welcome here. And it's just a really, I go there every time I'm in Helsinki, because it's like a gas station of hope.